All right, guys, welcome back to the show. Today, we have a very special guest. I've been waiting a minute to talk to these people. We have Caitlin with Clear Creek. Good Lord, I can't say it. Clear Creek Distilling. And we're going to talk about all their brands, everything they're doing. She was kind enough to send over some samples for me to try. You know, I'm dipping into those. And we're going to talk everything that they're doing up in Oregon. So let's get into it. So without further ado, here's Caitlin. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself. But before you do that, I would like to dip in. It's cold in the shed today. And so it's about 25 degrees outside. So I thought about, since you sent over this little sample of pear brandy, I know we're the whiskey show, but we're going to dip into this pear brandy. Tell us a little bit about this, and then tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into the actual business.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Randall, for having me.
No problem.
I know you asked me to be on forever ago, and shame, know your name. I totally spaced it. So apologies it's taking me this long to get on your podcast. And as penalty for having me on your podcast, you have to try brandy. That's how it works. Torturing one whiskey podcaster with brandy 1 week at a time. That's my slogan.
Absolutely. I love it.
So I had to send you a little bit of our pear brandy. Clear Creek Distillery was founded in 1985, and the flagship then, and the flagship still to this day, is going to be our pear brandy made from whole, perfectly ripened Bartlett pears from the Hood River Valley. It's 80 proof and bone dry. There's no sugar. It will smell like there's going to be some sweetness in there because there's so much pear flavor, but there isn't actually any residual sweetness. It's just 80 proof, clear, unaged pear brandy.
I will tell you, I'm not very versed into the brandy world. I'm trying, right? Where when you dip into whiskey, you tend to dip into other things as well, because like, oh, what does sherry taste like? If I'm having a sherry finish something, what does the sherry taste like? And there's a lot of brandies out there that are very whiskey centric. And this one to me is so clean and crisp, and it's not like a vodka. It's not like you would think it would be a vodka or anything like that. But I get the pear on the taste, which is really difficult, and you can go into that if you want to, getting the actual flavor from the fruit to come over into the distillation, because there's a lot of people that do it poorly. and I feel, and of course, you know, I am going to toot your horn a little bit, but at 80 proof, this thing still has flavor, and it doesn't feel overly watered down or anything like that. Explain your wickedry, or your wizardry, not your wickedry, your wizardry to me, because this
I'm okay with either. Well, it really comes down to honoring Mother Nature and honoring the fruit, right? We're incredibly lucky here in the Pacific Northwest in that virtually everything will grow here. And it just so happens that here in the Hood River Valley, as far as this time in its history, it's mostly Bartlett pears that are grown here. There's a lot of stuff that's grown here, but there's mostly Bartlett pears. And so our proximity to these wonderful Bartlett pears certainly helps, because we're about 5 minutes away from where we get our pears, and the distillery is literally nestled in and around a bunch of family-owned orchards here in Hood River. So that helps a lot. And we're also ripening those pears in-house. So Bartlett pears don't actually ripen on the tree for a number of reasons. One, if they were to ripen on the tree, they'd be so fragile you wouldn't be able to ship them even a mile down the street before they would be ruined from oxidation. So that's kind of the primary reason that they don't ripen on a tree. But because they don't ripen there, we have the opportunity to control and carefully ripen 58,000 pounds at a time as we crush them. So it takes more than one truck to bring a single load of pears here to the distillery. And then in 7 days, with carefully controlled temperature and humidity, all of those bins, all 52 of those fruit bins in the distillery ripen at the same time. So they turn from green pear-shaped pieces of wood to bright yellow, super soft, super sweet, richly flavored and aromatic Bartlett pears. And really from there, we're just getting out of their way. So we do pitch a proprietary yeast. It's nothing crazy, just a simple, hardworking yeast that gets the job done. And then after 2 weeks of fermentation, where we're punching down the cap and making sure that all of the whole fruit, all the material that's in those pears gets constantly worked into the fermentation, where all of those oils can get extracted by the growing amount of alcohol. That fermentation completes, and then we're distilling it on our 60-gallon Arnold Holstein hybrid pot stills. and there's lots of copper contact. So we're reacting out any kind of those sulfur compounds. And so what you're getting on the other side is just this clean, clear, and pure translation of what the flavor and aroma of a Bartlett pear is. When you taste it, for me anyways, it's like you're actually taking a bite into a fresh pear. So you get almost that sweetness of the juice, but you also get on the finish that little bit of a bitterness from having bitten through the actual peel of the fruit. So really, it's just us getting out of the way of something that's already perfect.
Okay, so a lot of questions just popped in my head, which is amazing because normally my head is just filled with, you know, the little monkey clanging a bell. So it's this is great. So you said a 2-week fermentation, whereas most whiskey distillers, they want hard and fast, you know, like 3 to 5 day. Are you doing that to hopefully get a malolactic fermentation out of that as well?
That's just the time that it takes to get them fermented, right?
Okay. And
we're not interested in trying to rush the process. Realistically, I think we say 2 weeks because it's a really convenient chunk. It's really closer to probably like 9 or 10 days, 11 days, but it includes crush day, and it also includes time to chill those fermentations down, because not only are we making sure that we're doing a fermentation on the whole fruit, we're also making sure that we're distilling on the whole fruit. And in order to do that, the tanks need to be mixed every time we load the stills to make sure you're getting an even amount of the material within the fermentation as well as the juice and booze as well. And so if you're going to do that, it's easier to chill the tank, one, because it keeps that ferment happy and healthy for longer, right? So it doesn't have any spoilage microorganisms that ruin your yields. But two, it's a lot easier to mix solids up from the bottom and mix it into the body because the valve on the tank comes from the bottom. So you're kind of trying to like fluff all the solids up from the bottom of the tank into the mass. Versus trying to push floating material on the top of the mash and try to push it down to the valve and try to get the pump to move it along with the liquid material so that each still is filled with the same kind of mix of solids and liquids. So it includes a few days to chill those tanks down so that we can get that cap to sink and make sure that we're able to load those stills well every time.
Awesome. And what is your and if you can't tell me, that's fine. What is your normal alcohol yield on a ferment like that? I know it depends upon the how many you have and stuff like that. But what is the normal yield? Because I know for whiskey you're trying to get anywhere between 8 and 10, 11%. Is this a little higher in the brandy?
Oh, percent. So I was gonna say, what exactly number are you asking for? I got a whole bunch of numbers and I'm missing a whole bunch of numbers depending on the scale you're talking about. So for the pear brandy, to make a 700 milliliter bottle, it takes 20 pounds.
Okay.
So that's on the bottle side of thing, what our yield is, right? The Brix for pears come in anywhere from 12 to 14 Brix.
Okay.
And so the rule of thumb on that is half plus a smidge as far as your ABV. So if you came in at 14 Brix, half would be 7%. You'd add a smidge, probably end up at 8 if you went to dry. So somewhere in there, 8% wash, 5 to 8%, depending on the season, depending on the year, and depending on the time of year. Those Brix change depending on the time that they've been in cold storage as well.
Got it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense because every independent pear is only going to give you what it has, right? Yeah. So you're only going to get so much sugar out of that. And you guys, like you said, you guys don't add any sugar to boost up the ABV or anything like that. It's all just pears and water, I'm guessing. No
water either. That's the other.
No water.
When you talk about choices that we make in order to be more ecological with our resources, right? That's the cool part about being a brandy distillery is, other than our process water for cooling and cleaning, that's all the water we use. So we're not using a bunch of water to not only the water that's used in order to malt the barley at the malting house, right? And then also the water that to re-wet it again as a part of the brewing process. For brandy, it's just the fruit. There's no added water.
Wow. Okay. That makes that makes it even cooler because like
Oh
it's
yeah, no,
literally
it's awesome.
it's just pear pulp in there, and you're just kind of like it is what it is, and you get what you get out of it,
Mhm.
which is really cool because it shows the whole like maybe this was a really good season or maybe it was a poor season, and it just kind of shows.
Well,
And I
lucky
know,
for us,
go
when it
ahead.
comes to pour seasons, I'm going to have to interrupt you before that
No,
gets
it's
too
fine.
far out there. When it comes to pour seasons, we don't really see that play out in a lackluster flavor or aroma on our
Okay.
brandy. What we would consider a pour season is low Brix. And so
Right.
far, those poor seasons, what happens is it just takes more fruit to make the same amount of alcohol. So our internal expenses are going to be higher that year because we had to buy more fruit to make sure we don't run out of pear brandy. But the quality of the pear brandy that we're making doesn't seem to be altered.
Right. And that's what I was trying to get at. Like if you're only able to get 50,000 pounds of pears instead of, because the crop, something happened to the crop or whatever,
Mhm.
you're still getting good fruit. You're
Yeah.
just not getting as much
Mhm.
of it. Do you, when you know that, hopefully, I mean, you guys have a direct line to the farmer, and do they kind of give you a heads up so you can start looking other places,
So
or do you
for
just say it is what it
pears,
is?
yeah, well, and that's the thing. So Clear Creek Distillery, we create a lot of fruit brandies and liqueurs, right?
Mhm.
And some of them we're working with packaging houses and sorting houses, like with the pears. We're working with
Mhm.
Duckwall. We've been working with them for the entire 40 years of Clear Creek's existence because there is no one orchard that can actually supply us with all the pears that we need because we buy so
Right.
many, right? So
Right.
we buy from the sorting house for something like pears, and we're buying the ugly fruit. So fruit that is perfectly good, it tastes good, it's got beautiful sugar, whatever, but it's kind of wonky. It's too small, it's too big, it's got a scar on it from a tree slapping
Mhm.
it around all summer long, and it's less likely to be picked up off the shelf at a grocery store. And so it gets sorted out and used for things like juice and for fruit cocktail and all those things. So those are the pears that we're buying. We're buying the ugly fruit and then turning them into brandy. But conversely, on the other side with cherries, we are actually working with a grower, Orchard View Cherries in the Dalles, Oregon. And absolutely, like our relationship with, whether it's a sorting house or with the individual farmers. And I grew up a farmer, so I'm always just naturally paying attention to,
Mhm.
the growing season, the what we're seeing, what the weather's doing, all that kind of stuff. We as a team keep track of that and make sure that we're checking in with our farmer partners, so that we can see what's coming down the road. Because especially with cherries, which are a very volatile crop,
Yes.
there has been a couple years in the recent past where we totally got skunked. I mean, I think we were planning on buying, 5 digits worth of fruit, and we got maybe like, I don't know, 10% of that.
Oh Lord.
Yeah, so decisions have to be made, and we do what we can, right?
Right.
But and so when the farmers have a great year, Clear Creek's going to have a great year. If the
Mhm.
farmers have a sucky year, it's not going to be so great over here either.
Right.
But it's really awesome to be able to celebrate, the provenance, the terroir of the region throughout those spirits, and also be a representative of our community and the connection to agriculture that we have.
Right. Right. And that's the cool thing about what you guys and a lot of other people are doing is you're finding stuff that's local to you, and you're doing that instead of saying, hey, I can get this from wherever and it doesn't matter, some commodity whatever.
Mhm.
You can go to Dole and get pineapples if you want, but it'd be better to go to the source and get it from them. That way you know kind of what you're getting. I've talked to so many people that say that that's their thing. Like they
Mhm.
would rather have a low yield and still have good product and know exactly where it came from and what it's doing, and know the quality of it, whereas getting one that comes in a little puree bag or something like that you get from the homebrew store or whatever,
Yeah.
that's not really gonna suffice for a commercial spirit like this.
Yeah.
So you had said something about being a farmer. Why don't you give us a little bit of your personal background and kind of tell us what made you get into this business?
Well, as the former, as the founder of Clear Creek Distillery, Steve McCarthy would say, I didn't give him an option not to hire me. And as a few other people have said, it seems as though it was a direct line to where I'm sitting before you as far as the choices that I made. But from my perspective, it wasn't quite so direct. At least I don't think so. But I grew up a wheat farmer in Eastern Oregon. I was fourth generation on the property, and grew up fixing equipment, and I was working for my dad, by 7 probably, because I had nimble little fingers and could crawl into tight spaces and fix all kinds of things. So I've been inside and out every nook and cranny of all of our equipment that we used to have. My parents actually needed to sell the ranch and retire in 2020, so we don't have it anymore. But I grew up. I could sit there in my head and I could point out where all the grease zerks on our combine were, because by like probably 8 or 9, that was my job for harvest. Right. Dad would wake me up at 4:30 in the morning, and we'd go out, and I would use the air compressor and spray out the all the chaff from the radiator to make sure that the engine didn't overheat. And then while he was fueling up, I'd go through and do all the daily greasing all the way from one side of the combine to the other. And I was driving that thing by 12. So definitely an interesting way to grow up. Super handy skill set that I have. I definitely, I know my title now is Master Distiller, but I'm definitely a farm kid and a jack of all trades. But the end of that statement is master of none. So I know that you are a plumber yourself, and I don't claim to be a plumber. However, I am a pretty dab hand at being an emergency plumber.
Absolutely.
I'm less good at being an emergency electrician, but I can at least get things off and safe. And I've been known to be able to rewire a switch or a pump if necessary, but definitely am not wiring it without having being able to copy somebody else's work. But that's the kind of skills that really kind of come in handy when you're running, a 40-year-old craft distillery in the middle of Hood River, Oregon. So it's funny when some of that farm kid stuff really, really comes out, and when it's really handy to have in my back pocket. But anyways, my parents wanted me to go to school, so I was fascinated with Food Network and Iron Chef, and thought, well, food science sounds really cool. And so I got my food science degree, and got excited about spirits, mostly irritated about spirits while I was in school, because I couldn't believe how little I knew about them. My parents having started a winery when I was in middle school, and being around wine and beer, I was like, I've got this all figured out. And then when I realized how little I knew about spirits, I was irritating. And so I tried to learn more, but the kind of information that we can get, there was no whiskey podcast, there was no whiskey Discord groups, and there weren't, Brown-Forman didn't have, websites dedicated to all their brands that show you the equipment and the mash bill and the choices that they make and the yeast strains. Like, there's so much more information, and it's been 15 years. So the only way to really get that information was to get a job at a distillery. So I cold called every distillery in the Pacific Northwest in 2010, my spring term of my senior year. And there was 12. And lucky for me, I got hired the day after my last final at Oregon State. So I've been here ever since, through an acquisition and Steve's retirement, and adding on new products and saying goodbye to some old ones. So it's been quite the journey so far.
It sounds like it, and you are cut of your own stone, because there is not that many people out there. I'm one of them too. I grew up similar to the way you did, where you just made it work because you had no other choice, right? You just go out there and do it. But that's not the case these days. Everybody with social media and all things that are going on, they're like, oh, I'm going to be an influencer. I'm going to do this. I started this podcast, and I'm sure everybody in the audience is like, oh God, here he goes again. But I started this podcast because I had all this information in my head, and my wife was just like, shut up already. Like, go talk to somebody else about it. She's all, why don't you start a podcast? And I was like, okay, I'll talk to a screen and see if maybe somebody will listen to that, and come to find out people like it. So that's so it's really cool. Like when you say, hey, this is what I want to do, it turned into something. And obviously you had, the Pacific Northwest has quite a few very good distilleries up there. And so you know, you picking this one and staying with it for as long as you have really is a testament to um, the business itself, because I'm sure by the time, speaking of moving on, let's move on to some Old Delicious, because we're in a brandy mood tonight, I guess. And so tell us a little bit about this, because this is actually really cool, because I've dipped into a couple of apple brandies in the past, and they are pretty, and I feel like they take a barrel fairly well, if I'm not mistaken. So talk to me a little bit about this one while I open it up. I should have done it before, but I was, you know, talking and listening. So
yeah, no worries. Well, the Old Delicious is a revival of Hood River Distillers' first ever brand. So Hood River Distillers, founded in 1934, 91 years ago, just a few months after the repeal of Prohibition. And they were founded doing the same thing that Clear Creek was founded in 1985 to do, which was turning beautiful fruit into Pacific Northwest fruit brandies. So the first ever brand they had was Old Delicious Apple Brandy. Now, fast forward decades and several wars later, and the original founders of Hood River Distillers sold to 4 families that are still owned it today in the like mid 50s, I think. And this Dodge family still runs it today. Anyways, and they've purchased Clear Creek Distillery, and we have all of this beautiful apple brandy that we had tucked away not only once but twice in old bourbon barrels. We had produced a great amount of apple brandy, and we had run out of barrels to put it in. And it was right around the launch of the Trails End bourbon. And so we had the only empty barrels that we had around were empty bourbon barrels. And after the apple brandy had been in there for a couple of years, we like, you know what, we like it, but we feel like it needs more of that influence from the American oak. And so we decided to pull it from that first barrel, put it into a second barrel. That's why it's double bourbon barreled apple brandy. So moving forward, the apple brandy spends 1 year in an ex-bourbon barrel. It comes out of that barrel and gets put into a second bourbon barrel for a second year. So it'll always be at least 2 years old. Although I think that bottle that you have is like three and a half, probably.
Oh,
for
wow.
the apple brandy. But it's this really beautiful bridge, one between, you know, Clear Creek Distillery now becoming as a part of Hood River Distillers, but also when you're talking about the history of the spirits of the United States, apple and peach brandies were the predominant spirit of colonists, right? In order to prove up on property, you had to have at least 30 peach trees and 50 apple trees. And so and all of our European colonists came over as farmers, and a part of being a farmer is using up the last of that fruit to turn it into brandy. You need that grain to make bread. You need it to plant the next year. Grain is very valuable, and it takes a lot of grain to make a single bottle of whiskey. And it only takes 1 or 2 mangy trees to make a whole year's worth of brandy. And oftentimes those brandies were lauded as being the higher quality product. So they were saved. That's kind of like where the American idea of brandies or for fancy occasions came from, is because they were better. And so they were saved for special occasions. That was when you brought the good stuff out. It was the good stuff was always brandy. And so, you know, having been aged in heavy char American oak casks, it's this wonderful bridge between, like I said, what Americans were probably drinking and what we should be drinking today. And so you get some of those apple characteristics, some of the light fruity floral notes, but also from the bourbon and also the American oak cask, you get this kind of richness, some like fatty nuts, a little bit of that dark chocolate, a little bit of that maybe charred or caramelized sweet corn. So it's a bridge also between people that are like, I only drink bourbon and brandy's a scary word, and actually finding out that it's actually really enjoyable and there's a lot of things that you can do with it. In fact, it's just as good over an ice cube or neat in a glass.
Yes. I mean, and I will just let you know that coming from the pear brandy, this one is more whiskey-esque, right? It has a lot more of those. It even has some vanillins and stuff like that from that barrel. And even a little bit of caramel, almost like a caramel apple or something like that. But the apple is prominent in it. But you could give this to, like you were saying, to like a whiskey person, and I don't know. I think they would really enjoy it because yes, it's not you don't get the graininess of it, but you do kind of get at the back end that corn, sweet corn note at the very end. It's a really intriguing. And why did y'all y'all pick 42? I can't even read it. 41.2%.
Yeah, so it's 85 proof.
Oh, okay.
And it's a great eye, by the way. There's a number of reasons. One, we wanted to not have to chill filter it. We wanted to keep all of those oils in there, right? So if we keep it up above 80, then it's not going to have a haze at room temperature. The other reason was it was released the year that River Distillers turned 85. And with Clear Creek having been founded in 1985, it was really kind of poetic to keep that proof at 85 and kind of honor all of the pieces that came together in order to launch this beautiful product.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. That makes a lot more sense now that you say it like that. It's 85 because it's 85. I mean, that's kind of the whole point. So is it the same process as the pear brandy? You just take the apples, crush them up, and it is what it is?
Yep. Very, very similar. In fact, whenever we give industry tours here at the distillery, we usually talk through the process of pears because it's what we process the most of, but it's also reasonably similar to all the other fruits. They all have their little quirks. For apples, the apples don't have to be ripened in-house. Hooray. But they they're pretty firm, right? We used to use Golden Delicious apples. So the brandy that you have there is made from Golden Delicious apples.
Okay.
We had to change a number of years ago to opal apples. For the consumer, there might be a slight increase in the amount of apple characteristic. And for us, it's we like the brandy that we're making, and it makes just a little bit more brandy per apple. So that was a win for us, this change this time around. And it was because the Golden Delicious apples are just not as popular as they used to be. And so getting them in the quantities that we needed, it was becoming fairly difficult. So we switched to an apple that was a little bit more ubiquitous and grown at a larger volume. Where was I going? I was going somewhere.
You were going somewhere. You were on a tangent, a pretty good tangent too. So
yeah, I know that was really good. And I sidetracked myself.
It's okay. It's all good. I'll figure out something else that we could talk about.
Yeah.
So.
Apple brandy. Yes. Okay. I remember. All right. Here we go. See, and then you can do a smash cut and nobody will ever know that I told
absolutely. I won't. I don't do that. You get it live, guys. You're getting all the bloopers, all the bloopers and everything. Just for that, I'm not going to.
Okay. So the difference between pear mash production and apple mash production, apples are very firm, right? And so we have what's essentially an industrial grater. We've had various versions of this piece of equipment over the years as we've worn them out. The current one uses like an electric motor, and it spins two scary pieces of angle iron, and they scrape and smash the apples across a grater face. Like it does look like a grater that you'd use to make cheese for some sort of horrific dip on Super Bowl Sunday, but massive. And then we use a pump to then pump that whole apple pulp into the tanks for fermentation. And then it takes, because the apples come straight out of cold storage, it does take a couple days for those to warm up and really start kicking off and fermenting.
Right. So
the fermentations are again that 2 weeks, but mostly because it's the warm up time. Apples will ferment faster than pears, but they come in so cold and they haven't had a week to ripen and come up to 75 degrees.
Right.
So it takes a little bit more time. But yeah, the piece of equipment that breaks those whole apples down, it's very violent.
And it tastes like it in the glass. No, I'm joking. Actually, in the glass, it is, again, I hate to use the word smooth because everybody, cringes when you say that, but the viscosity, I guess I'll say, the viscosity of it is really nice. It's coating on the tongue. And then with me, especially when I eat apples, sometimes on the back of my front teeth, I will feel, it feels like almost a little, I don't want to say waxiness, but like it feels like a feeling. And I'm getting that same thing from this, which is, it takes me back to a memory of, a time when you're eating an apple, so that to me is so cool because obviously taste is so subjective, and I could tell you it tastes like, cherry Laffy Taffy, and everybody like, oh, cool, let me grab that, but it doesn't, right?
Mhm.
So it's all about going back to that memory that you
Mhm.
have in your head, and each
I
person
love
has
pictures.
a different memory. So it's like it is so cool that like I taste this, but you might taste something else, and it's totally right. They're both right because it's whatever you're really subjectively tasting, unless it tastes like crap, and then you're wrong. But
Well, and that's the thing, like as the distillers. So Garrett Trotter Ramos and Everett Rubin are two distillers. They're both amazing. But as we go through and we work on sensory and we work on blends together over time, once you've been in the business for a while, you develop that ability to smell and taste things, and then you have built up this vocabulary on how to describe it, right? And there's a reasonable, like, it's not a set in stone vocabulary, but there's some agreed upon like global words that we use as descriptors, right? And sometimes when I'm doing my tasting notes, I will do what I taste and smell, and then I will convert it or translate it into those more basic, recognizable, agreed upon terms to describe an experience, to describe a flavor experience, right?
Right.
But unfortunately, over time, that does mean that you lose the pictures. That's what I like to say. You lose the pictures. So you lose sometimes when you immediately smell and taste something, and then you're just like snapped back into the last time that flavor or that aroma really imprinted on your brain, right? Because flavors, the part of our brain that processes flavors and aromas is literally the same department that processes memories. And so that's why smell and taste memories are so powerful. So yeah, I regret that I don't get the pictures very often. I celebrate them when I do just get like a flash of exactly where that is. But when I'm teaching any kind of sensory, when your brain gifts you with the pictures, it is telling you all of the tasting notes of that aroma. You just have to spend time in that memory and figure out what was it in that memory that you were smelling, right? So if you smelled a whiskey and you're like, wow, this reminds me of, visiting my grandpa, and he was a woodworker, and he always used to wear an oiled woodworker's apron. And so whenever I would go into the garage or the shed, and this whiskey smells exactly like visiting grandpa when I was little. And it's like, okay, well, what kind of wood was he working with? Like, what kind of leather was that made out of? Did he wear a cologne? Like, was it spring? Was it summertime because you were visiting your parents in the summertime? What were the wildflowers? Did he just mow the lawn? Was there an empty field of hay nearby? All of those things are part of that smell of that memory. And you can use that picture to then break down that aroma into these generalized words that we've kind of all decided on in order to describe our experience. So the pictures are super helpful. It's an opportunity to kind of dig into that memory a little bit more to find out what you're actually smelling.
Right. Touche. That was an amazing rant you went on there.
Sorry.
And I appreciate it. No, I love it because it's exactly where I go all the time is it's not about what's in the glass. Yes, it is about what's in the glass, but it's also about the memory, the thing. But one thing that you said that kind of, I don't want to say disheartened me, but the fact that you don't really get those very often anymore. Is that just because you are tasting or sampling and blending so much that you don't get that, or is it that
I think
just after the years,
you spend time parsing those smells and aromas out of the memory, and then you just kind of shortcut it, right? And so now you're like, you've built this like, I smell a thing, I know the word. I smell a thing, I know the word, right? That you don't need the help of the memory, I think, to find that aroma. I still get them. I don't want you to think that I've been robbed of this secret joy of drinking a beautiful spirit. I do get them, but there's some workarounds. I think the other fun thing, I remember when Garrett first started, I warned him that he might be able to walk past a dumpster in the summertime now, and his brain might tell him that smells or that's garbage. But within a couple years, he'd be able to walk by that same dumpster and describe what's in it and give essentially like tasting notes on the dumpster. And he came back later and was like, I hate that you were right. But, the three of us, we can walk through, and then I'm going to assume this is the same for all distillers, right? We don't smell better than the average bear, but we are trained to pay attention to what our nose tells us very, very closely. That's the only difference. So we have this vocabulary connection that's just automatic now with our nose. But I can, I pet sit for some friends, and I'll walk the dog through their neighborhood and be like, oh, okay, somebody's having hot dogs for dinner. Like, no, it's pizza night here. Oh, laundry. It smells like the dryer though. So, cause that's Downy, and that's definitely a fabric softener. Like, you can go through you can walk through a community and figure out what everybody's evening is based on the smells that are coming out of their house, which is kind of a really fun connection, I guess. I find a lot of joy in it. I mean, I got out of my house over the weekend, and I was on my way to the gym, and I just was like, somebody's having French toast, and now I'm hungry. Thanks. And who knows if anybody in the community could even smell it outside of the house, but I immediately was like, it's not pancakes. It's definitely French toast. And
it's French toast for sure. For sure. That is so awesome. I love that. Yeah. Okay, so you said something earlier, and correct me if I'm wrong. You said that you were the master distiller. Do you consider yourself a master distiller? I know that might be a loaded question,
but it does. I do, but this is my hang up on it, right? I have, I started on the packaging line. I've been in this business for 15 years, which is a long time, but at the same time, it's not that long of a time. And there are amazing people that have a lot more experience and knowledge than I do, and they're not master distillers. And so part of me is like, well, I'm some dumb, young, dumb, Susie come lately and no master distiller. But at the same turn of events, I should and want to be proud of the hard work that I put into myself and the brand and the career that I have. And also representation is so important, right? There are not a lot of women in this industry, and there's no reason for women to not be in this industry, right? We have just as good as smellers as men do. And, I've pretty much every knuckle on my hands has got scar tissue from wrenching on old equipment, right? I deserve and have earned my right to be here. And that representation is important. That if this is something that excites you, if this is something that brings you joy and passion, no matter who you are, if I can do it, you can do it. And so, I remind myself that outside of whatever, negative self-talk or shyness or humbleness that I have that makes me a little reticent to write Master Distiller across my chest, that it is okay for me to accept the position that I am and be very proud of it.
Absolutely. I that was kind of a loaded question because, there's a lot of people out there that they're like, there is no such thing as a master, blah, blah, blah. But I myself am a master, right? I'm a master in my trade, only because they said I was, but it's one, but that's one of the things, right? We never stop learning in everything. I know you probably did something today where you're like, well, crap, if I would have known that, I would have just done it that way. We all continue to learn, but we all, you and I both in different fields, obviously, have put the hard-earned time, energy, money. We've put money back into the business, doing continuing education and all of these things to make us the best in our field, or what we think is the best in our field. And you are 100%
every
correct.
day is an opportunity to be a little bit better.
Absolutely. And you are 100% correct. There are not enough women in the whiskey and spirits industry. And why not? Because I know of a couple of women in the industry, and their nose and palates are absolutely fantastic and amazing, far superior than a lot of the men out there that are sitting there smoking their cigars and stuff like that and saying, oh, this tastes like Jack Daniels, whatever. But like that's the thing. Just understanding that, and you can get into that if you want to, and if you don't, I understand. Being a woman in this facility, in this realm, has to come with its trials and tribulations. We're not talking about, I know everybody treats everybody nicely, but there is a stigma to the spirits, and especially whiskey in general, which we're fixing to get into, which is a good segue for me, obviously. there is a stigma that whiskey's a man's drink, you know,
Yep.
and it's like, it's one of those things and how do you combat that negativity in what you do? Obviously in the spirit that you're making, right?
Mhm.
You combat that in what you're doing, but how do you, you know, obviously being the master distiller, being with the business for this long and being on site is a big part of it. But how do you combat that basically?
My answer is going to come in a variety of small packets. One of them is I know a lot of women in the industry that have dealt with and have experienced a lot of, you know, fairly intense negative interactions with men, and for whatever reason, I was blessed with the body of an average man, right? I'm nearly 6 feet tall. I'm over 200 pounds. I go to the gym 5 times a week, and I'm on my way to be able to bench press 200 pounds because my predecessor, Joseph O'Sullivan, is in the neighborhood of that weight, and he's on board for me being able to bench press him. And so what a great target to give myself. So
Absolutely.
like, you know, if my parents had let me play football in high school, like I would, oh man, I would have destroyed, right? And so because of that, I don't have to deal with a lot of that stuff. And so I think size does matter. I am an average man size. And so there's you're not going to physically intimidate me. And so I don't have to deal with a lot of that guff, but I'm friends with so many women in the industry that are on the smaller side. And that's something that's a part of their everyday. And while certainly I am careful and have an eye to my own personal safety when I'm in situations, they are even more so, which should not be the norm. The other thing, I have to answer questions like, what's it like to be a woman in the industry all the time? And I'd like to think that I'm a little bit more than my gender, but Absolutely. That is definitely a common question that women in the industry have to handle. And sometimes it's the only question that we get to handle, despite our vast knowledge and experience and our ability to contribute to the conversation. The only time that we're invited to speak is to share our perspective on what it's like as a woman. So those are some of the things that you deal with. And then as far as being on site, there's some quirky stuff with, you know, we'll have vendors that come in and they see the wonderful young men that are distillers, and we'll start talking to them first. And then they'll be like, oh no, she's the boss. That happens sometimes. Or I'll be at tasting events with Garrett and Everett, and the line will form behind or in front of the boys, and then the line will separate one person at a time to come talk to me. And I don't think it's because they're like she doesn't know anything. I think it's a lot of unconscious bias. It doesn't make it okay, but it's not like it's not malevolent either, right? They're not picking me out and bullying me. It's just an unfortunate side effect of our culture right now. But as far as day-to-day work with with my 2 distillers, we've had a long-standing tradition at Clear Creek. I mean, throughout the history, not only of my being at Clear Creek, but the history of the brand itself, we likely had the first ever female head distiller here, Rachel Inman, in craft distilling in the early 90s, right? Steve hired Rachel almost immediately at the very beginning of the brand, and she left the company 8 years ago, I think, and moved on. So she was with the company for a very long time, considering we turned 40 this year, right? Yeah. And for the majority of my time here, the staff has been nearly or actually over 50% women. So as a brand, I'm nothing new. I'm not even, and really as distilling, I'm also nothing new. But as far as doing physical and manual work around here, we have a thing that's like, once you come in the door, you're just a piece of machinery, right? Absolutely. Certainly I care for Garrett and Everett more than a piece of equipment. I will never, ever kick them and call them bad names. And I might do that to a piece of equipment, but it doesn't matter. Our genders don't matter. We're here to work. And so you just show up with a good attitude and do the best you can. And the rest doesn't matter.
Awesome. And I by no way meant anything by what I said. I don't know. No, I know you. I should have thought about that before I said it, because I'm sure she gets that all the time, and I don't want to make it a stigma, but I want to praise you for that, being, doing that, because like we say, it is a very male driven process, and we want to make sure that you're out there kicking ass, which you are, obviously. So while you were talking about that, I opened the Trails End, but I want to tell you, I want to tell you something.
Oh no!
the cork broke off. Now it's not a big deal because
you're a plumber, because I'm a distiller and an ex-farmer, and I know you're a plumber. I have this Leatherman in my pocket. Do you as well? Because if you don't, what kind of a plumber are you, sir?
Not I. Off camera, I told you, I'm not in this pocket. I don't. You're gonna call me out for wearing PJs on a podcast. I have been in, I think, 6 or 7 weddings, and so has this Leatherman. That's awesome. I love that. But let's talk about that real fast, and then we'll talk about the brand. How I know this is a thing, and I don't know if you're in the packaging department or whatever as well, but like finding good corks that don't freaking break. This is such a thing. Like I run across it all the time. And I talk to distillers and they're like, yeah, man, we get what we can get, and sometimes we go to synthetic, sometimes we have natural corks. We're just getting what's out there. Is that the case with you guys as well?
Yeah, mostly, especially like if you're not willing to spend like $7 or $8 a cork.
Yeah.
Like I'm pretty like, and the companies are coming out with more innovative designs that are a little bit more reliable, right? And certainly you've probably seen some closures out there, the glass and silicone closures, right? Those are pretty easy to get off. But some of the newer closures that are all one piece, even if they're all synthetic. So it's a one piece synthetic cork, so you don't get that breakage. But there's a trade off between cost and aesthetic and what your brand's going to look like. Do we need to pause for a second so you can open that and try it?
No. I was able to get it open. Okay, it cracked open, and I was like, oh crap! But you were in the middle of talking, so I was going to stop you right in the middle, but I didn't. So let's talk about this. This is the Trails End crafted 8-year Kentucky. So tell us a little bit about that.
So Trails End, that product line, is a sourced bourbon. It comes from Kentucky. I can't tell you what distillery it comes from, but it's a real good one. I can tell you that the mash bill is 78-10-12. And then we finish it here in Oregon. The Trails End 8 is finished with toasted Oregon oak staves and then cut to proof with our glacial fed spring water to 90. So it's a little overproof of that beautiful Kentucky bourbon. The origins of that brand, our owner, Hood River Distillers' current CEO, Ron Dodge, he had been purchasing bourbon in the late 90s, early 2000s, because he's a little bit of a whiskey magician. And he was like, you know what? I think bourbon's going to have a moment. I think it's going to happen. I think I feel it in my bones. And so he started buying up new make bourbon down in Kentucky for a project that might come along and need some really beautiful Kentucky bourbon, right? You just never know. And then, years go by, and the acquisition of Clear Creek Distillery in 2014 by Hood River Distillers. And all of a sudden, Ron has this bevy of spirits nerds at his disposal. And one of the first things he did was, came to us at the distillery and say, you know what? You guys are really great at what you do. You guys have been great at it for 30 years. And Hood River Distillers, we're really good at doing paperwork and putting liquid into bottles, because as of the late 50s, early 60s, they turned into a brand house and a rectifier. So they buy bulk spirits and blend them into new brands and new fun products, right? But they hadn't been an active distillery for quite some time. And so he's like, this is the deal. We'll do the boring stuff that we're great at, and you guys keep doing the amazing things that you're doing. And we're 10 plus years into that deal, and they have not wavered. Clear Creek Distillery focuses all our time on continuing to make really super awesome things. And we have changed a few of our processes, but it's only because it's what the product needs to continue to be amazing, right? And so he brings us all of this bourbon and he says, all right, nerds, what do you think? And with Clear Creek Distillery being the house built of Oregon oak, because McCarthy's is aged in 100% Oregon oak, the team was like, well, why don't we finish it in Oregon oak and see how that works? And then I was on the stills, and I was like, all right, well, it starts in Kentucky and we're finishing in Oregon oak. Everybody loves the Oregon Trail game. Why don't we call it Trail's End? And they ended up calling it Trail's End. So that's how we got our Trail's End bourbon line. The 8-year that you're trying now is the flagship of that line. We have since released 2 more, one with a red label, also an 8-year bourbon, but instead finished in ex-bourbon casks. So it's the final use of those bourbon casks within our system before I resell them or give them away to local breweries to make sure that those barrels stay in use. So the bourbon comes out, the apple brandy goes in, the apple brandy comes out, the bourbon goes back in. And that's the 8-year apple brandy barrel finished Trail's End. And the final one in that line is the Trail's End 10. So it's a 10-year-old Kentucky bourbon that we're finishing in the whole Oregon oak casks. So that finishing period is a little bit longer, and you're getting some more of those oxidative reactions and flavor development over that finishing with the Trail's End 10.
Awesome. Now, I will tell you, it's very typical Kentucky bourbon, right? But tell us kind of, I've had quite a few Oregon oak, finished or fully matured whiskeys. Tell us what what you feel the Oregon oak brings to this whiskey in particular.
Well, I would say the first thing that it does is it softens some of the more harsh edges that a bourbon tends to have. So on the nose, there's usually a little bit of a high note that people would find similar to rubbing alcohol. It's not rubbing alcohol, but that's going to be the closest like word to smell that people are going to grasp. So there's usually some of this kind of like really high note of isopropyl. That's almost gone with that finishing with the toasted Oregon oak stave. So just off the bat. And then what's interesting about Oregon oak is that, well, there's a lot of things that are interesting about it, but we don't have to go that deep down the rabbit hole. However, in regards to the flavor and aroma, with heavy char American oak, a lot of times if you're going to get a citrus profile, it's going to lean towards lime. With Oregon oak, it's actually a little bit more like burnt orange peel. And so you get this really nuanced change in the citrus profile of that whiskey from aroma all the way through the palate, where it's not that like sweet lime flavor, but it's an orange lime, which sometimes people will interpret as different citrus fruits, right? That's where it kind of gets into the weeds of being whatever somebody's more familiar with, but it makes it a little bit more of a dynamic citrus profile that you're going to get. And then it also adds a deep kind of rich, more fermented vanilla characteristic on both the aroma and the palate. And the last thing is it adds a little bit of those kind of roasty, toasty nuts. It adds a little bit of body to that spirit. And so in doing that, the finish actually is extended pretty substantially. And some of that bitterness from those extra caramelized wood sugars in those staves kind of staves off that bitter finish and stretches it out even longer. So we're not trying to flavor these whiskeys. We're just trying to accentuate the what's already in that beautiful whiskey and perpetuate it for as long as we can.
That you're right on. And obviously almost like you knew what you were talking about there for a second.
Weird, right?
But yeah, it's so strange. But like it is, to me, it's in right now, coming off of the, like the apple brandy, it is just an inherent like citrusy, almost, I would say, and don't shoot me for this, almost like a lemon lime soda, like Sprite or something like that. Cause it has a little effervescence on the tongue, which is, I'm really enjoying that as well. And the proof is spot on. It's not punchy. It's not hitting, but it's really the vanillas, the caramels that are there are really nice. I mean, it's just an all around a great bourbon, but then it also has a really great story. And that's part of the reason we make whiskey, right? Is because the story behind it. I mean, you can slap a label.
Really competitively priced. I think depending on where you're buying it, it's between like $35 and $45.
Okay.
Like it's so really approachably priced.
Yeah. I mean, you're not bottom shelving it, which is good. I wouldn't want you to, but at the same time, it's in that price range that everybody kind of goes for, because they're like, everybody always asks me, being the whiskey guy, like, what whiskey would you recommend? And I'm like, well, it kind of depends upon your palate and blah, I get way too nerdy on them. And I'm like, you could just say, hey, go pick up this one. it has some unique flavors. It's still bourbon, but it has some unique flavors going in it. I feel like giving this to somebody that wants to venture into a new type of bourbon or something like that. They're used to the old Kentucky style. This is going to give them just enough outside of that before we get too deep into the woods with the other sample. But this gets them a little bit out of that, but yet it also is still very much a Kentucky bourbon, which is really cool because it's staying true to the actual bourbon profile, just giving it a little bit of extra softening and also adding some citrus and other things in it. It's really amazing. And Oregon oak is pretty prevalent now in the whiskey market. Is that correct?
I don't know if I would go so far as to say prevalent. It is a bit of a monster to tame. It is a very big and bold oak, and so you see it used very sparingly. Clear Creek's been using it since the very beginning with McCarthy's. So we are well versed at how to handle it, but it's not something that you can just like chuck something in there and expect it to come out great on the other side, right? You have to watch it really carefully and make sure that that those flavors and aromas are going to match up. And then interestingly, everybody's very used to American oak being a heavy char. With all of our French oak and our Oregon oak barrels here at Clear Creek, they're all medium toast. The only char barrels are the Kentucky bourbon barrels that come in. That's it. And so that also adds, in my mind, a little bit of that riskiness as well. But Oregon oak and French oak, as the tree grows and as the wood structure itself, are actually very similar. So the flavors are very different, but the kind of wood penetration that you can get through the wood grain is similar in that they both have soft tyloses. So as those staves are yard cured, that those tyloses break down a little bit, and so it doesn't require the damaging of the wood grain like the American oak does with that charring process in order to open up the wood pores to get that flow through that toast layer back and forth as the temperatures change through the season. So a lot of fun to work with, but it needs to be used carefully.
I love how you dip into the nerdy words there for a second, just enough to like tease everybody. Yeah, we could deep dive on. Oh no, you're not going to scare me away. You might scare the listeners away, but you won't scare me away. I recently did a episode. I don't know if you know Christopher Conrad with Bad Motivator Barrels. He makes smaller Bain Marie style pot with a barrel head. Where he takes staves and puts it in there for home brewers and stuff like that. And we talked about Oregon oak for over 2 hours, so he's very, very well versed in it. But so yeah, it's super cool that you guys are doing that, and you're taking just I hate to call it a basic bourbon, but you know what I mean. You're taking the basic bourbon and just kind of turning it on its head a little bit and saying, no, we're going to do our thing to it. And it's really singing in the glass to me, especially right now. So you guys have underneath your umbrella company, right? You have quite a few brands and also different spirits. Like you talked about liqueurs and stuff like that. Do you want to kind of go into that before we get into the one I've been waiting on?
The one that you've been waiting for the longest. Yeah, absolutely. So Hood River Distillers, we are the first and oldest distillery here in the Pacific Northwest. And over the years, between acquisitions of 2 separate distilleries, as well as all of the brands that they've created themselves, and then all of us created together, the portfolio as it stands is 30 brands and 300 SKUs, of which Clear Creek is only one of those brands. And within Clear Creek, there is, I think, 20 different liquids. So a handful of clear brandies, eau de vies made, just from the fruit. So cherry, pear, plum. Then we have 2 different ages of our apple brandy. We have, and then we have 7 different fruit liqueurs. So that's all just within the Clear Creek family. And McCarthy's is increasingly, even though it was an original Clear Creek Distillery brand, started, the first distillation in January of 1994 by Steve McCarthy, first released in 98, which makes us the first American single malt. Because American single malt and all these fruit brandies doesn't necessarily seem like a portfolio. Sometimes McCarthy's is treated a little bit like its own independent brand. So McCarthy's goes to some shows and events and does some things on its own, and Clear Creek sometimes goes without McCarthy's, but they're both very important to not only the whole Clear Creek story, but also the whole Hood River Distillers story. And then we've got a small gin distillery up in Seattle, Captive Spirits, that makes big gin, and they have a couple different versions, a peat barreled version and a bourbon barreled version of that gin as well. And then for independent brands that come out of this facility, we have Timberline Vodka, which is made from 14 different varieties of Pacific Northwest apple and grain. And then the DeGroff Amaro and Aperitivo, made in partnership with Dale DeGroff and Ted Bro. And then the Old Delicious, which is what we've tried. And then we have a more value vodka called Lewis and Clark Premium. I'm going to forget one. And then, yeah, we do all of the R&D for the larger company here at the distillery as well. So even if it's not something that the team here at Clear Creek Distillery is going to produce, we are the brain trust for the company. So it'll get developed here before it goes on down to the plant for its full production.
Awesome. That is a lot. Like you guys must have a team over there, because like,
we
seriously.
do, absolutely. And to make matters worse, I'm gonna just take 2 seconds to really super blow your mind. So
go ahead.
We also have a 60+ year relationship with Casa Orendine, which is one of the 4 founding families of the tequila region. And we've been importing their misto for decades. And recently, in the last few years, have re-strengthened our relationship with them by becoming the importer for their Batanga tequila. So it's 100% blue agave tequila. It's all the agave is grown around the distillery. They're using classic brick mortar ovens to cook those piñas, ferment and distill them, and then bottle that Batanga as both a silver and a repo that come up here, and we distribute for them in the United States.
Wow.
So that's one of those other 30 brands.
Do y'all sleep? I mean, good Lord.
I don't. I assume that nobody else does.
Yeah, exactly. So is the distillery basically running 24 hours a day? I mean, with all those brands and marketing and packaging and all of those things. Yeah, you must have a team that's just interwoven so much that, man, it's got to be crazy. Just the labeling machine alone is got to be.
I mean, absolutely. So we have the bottling plant, the Hood River Distillers bottling plant. I think they bottle and super. I mean, obviously this is recorded, so technically you're quoting me, right. But I don't. I have no idea what the specific annual numbers are for cases bottled, but I feel fairly comfortable that they crank out over 1 million cases across all of the brands a year down the bottling plant. So they have 3 they have 3 automatic lines and then 1 hand bottling line for smaller projects. And the majority, I think we've got 60 employees for Hood River Distillers, and the vast majority of them are down at the bottling plant.
Yeah, as they need to be. Good Lord. Mm-hmm. So okay, let's move on to the one that I've been waiting on. Not that all the others were not absolutely fantastic. I don't want you to say that, but I am a single malt fan, and we are talking about none other than McCarthy's whiskey. Now, this one is aged 6 years. This one, to me, like, I've had McCarthy's in the past. Who hasn't, right? McCarthy's is a name brand when you're talking about American single malt. But the fact that this is purely in Oregon oak, correct?
Correct. Both new and used cooperage in Oregon oak.
Okay, so that is pretty unique, right? That is not, I don't know of anybody else who is doing, there might be some trying to, but anybody else has been doing that for
like a percentage. So I know a couple brands that use zebra barrels where some of the staves are Oregon oak in their barrel and some aren't. And then of course Westland and their Garyana releases, and they're awesome. And one, as a team, huge respect, but also, in their transparency, they include the blend information on the label, so you can actually see how much of those releases come from the Oregon oak, which is
right.
Cool. But yeah, for McCarthy's, it's always been 100% Oregon oak, and every blend, the percentage between new and used cooperage is different. In my time here at Clear Creek, there have been blends that have been all new, and there have been blends that are all used. It just depends on, you know, what the whiskey is telling us. You know, we have an idea of what the fingerprint of McCarthy's is, with the core brand identity of the flavor and aroma that one's going to expect out of that McCarthy's. But there is still, you know, because we're such a small whiskey brand, there is the joy in celebrating the differences between each batch that we blend up, and that's kind of the fun part of those changes.
Yeah. I mean, and this is, I'm reading. I should have done my research. 100% peated malt.
Correct. It's 100% heavily peated malt that we import from Scotland, and then our current brewing partner and has been for quite some time now is Double Mountain Brewing here in Hood River, Oregon, because you know, as the tradition goes with American distilling, many of our brands that are well as bigger than McCarthy's, like Stranahan's, right? They also started with a companion brewery brewing their wash for them. The brewery was next door, and they had a pipe through the wall that went and fed into the wash stills, right? Super cool. So there is there's an awesome tradition within American single malt where you're working with a partner brewery, because it's starting a business is difficult, and starting a business where you have to buy a whole brewery and then also a whole distillery, and then you can't sell anything for 3 to 5 years, like nightmare fuel. And so, like, I love that it has become a thing where people can invest in not only starting a small business, but also invest in their community with working with a brewery partner, right? It's super cool. Plus, there's so many distilleries that even if they did choose to do all of their production in-house, they came they were American brewers. And that's so fun. Like, as one gets to experience more of the distilling world on a global scale, like the terminology that we use here in the United States, it's very American brewing centric, right?
Yes.
Versus the terminology that's used, like, you know, all throughout the UK and stuff. It's very specifically, there's distilling terminology and then there's brewing terminology. There are two different sets of languages. And it's very rare that you come across an American distillery that uses only distilling language. And that's usually because the owners or the distillers got their training overseas, and they built that facility and that brand with a purpose to be a whiskey distillery. And there is a big difference in those languages. So it's a great tradition. I love that there is a more brewing centric focus when it comes to part of the whole of all of the American single malts that are out there, because I think it gives so much option for creativity.
And also, like, I've talked to many distillers, and they're like, you know, if you don't come from the brewing background, you don't really care so much about fermentation or, you know, the boil after the mash or whatever. You're just trying to get as much sugar as you can so you can distill it over. You're using commodity grain, you know, distiller's malt or whatever you want to call it, throwing it in a still at 15% and making whiskey out of it. Whereas if you're a brewer, you know that having a high attenuating yeast is going to give you these funky flavors and all of this and blah, blah, blah.
That's the fun thing. That's the fun thing. I'm gonna quote Reed Huddleston here, and I promised him that I was gonna use his description of the difference between brewers and distillers all the time. But I promised him that I would always make sure that he gets credit. So shout out to Reed Huddleston. He's amazing.
We love Reed.
He's a genius. Everybody loves Reed. But this is how he explains the difference between brewers and distillers, and it's perfect. So imagine you're going bowling and with a group of brewers and a group of distillers. The group of brewers, they show up and they've got matching bowling shirts. They don't, you know, they have custom made bowling shoes that match. They don't put them on until they get inside. They each bring in their own ball, and it's all been custom and tailor fit to fit their exact hand measurements and their finger size and the whole 9 yards. They get there an hour early to make sure that they've properly polished the floor and they've inspected the pins to make sure that they're all in balance. And then they very carefully practice at home to make sure that every time they throw that ball down the alley, they're going to hit a strike every time, right? The distillers show up, they're probably 15 minutes late, and they show up just in whatever they happen to be wearing. And they rent bowling shoes, and they fit well enough, right? They grab the balls that are there for for all the filthy public, right? And they just chuck the ball in whatever direction they feel like. And then they run ahead of the ball as fast as they can to set the pins up in front of it to hit a strike every time. Both teams hit strikes every time, but it's a difference in approach. And, in order to be an excellent, award-winning, amazing brewer, not only do you have to be incredibly creative and you have to be, incredibly organized. So you're doing the exact same thing over and over and over again. So everything is completely replicatable. You also have to be very, very, very clean. And in some ways also efficient. And there's differences in translating from brewing to distilling, because in a lot of ways, by building in inefficiencies, whether by like carefully managing what brewers would consider spoilage bacteria and losing some of your yield, but gaining flavor in return, or just choosing a grain or grains that are maybe not going to get you the most alcohol per pound, but in that inefficiency is more flavor, right? And so that we're not as clean as a brewery is going to be, because that flora, those wild yeasts and bacteria that call our distilleries home, is really another place where you get the identity of the spirit that's going to come out of that facility, and you can't replicate it, right? I could give anybody the recipe for McCarthy's, and it's never going to taste like it does. Like, it's not going to taste like it does because it wasn't made here in Hood River. It's not going to taste like it does because it wasn't made on our hybrid pot stills. And it's probably not going to be distilled a single time on those pot stills because we're crazy. And then it's not going to be aged in those Oregon oak barrels, right? There's so many things that make a spirit what it is in all of these different facilities. And part of that is those built-in inefficiencies, which, like, for a brewer, like, they're probably already shaking in their rubber boots.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the story of McCarthy's, why 100% peated? Because I know a lot of the other peated whiskeys out there are a lot less than that. They're 40%, even some as low as 10%. Why 100? I mean, because I took a sip of it, and of course I've had it in the past, but I haven't had this bottle, right? So it is a little bit different. And it's not overly peated. It's not like octomore smoke in your mouth. And it's not like somebody's blowing cigarette smoke in my face or anything like that. It's very subdued and very, very polished and all of the things. Why 100% peated? Was it tried with other, percentages, and 100% was where it needed to land?
So there's two big reasons.
Okay.
So the first reason is because we can. So when Steve,
you're going to make me spit.
Sorry. Actually, you know what? Fuck it. I'm not sorry. That was awesome. I will never, ever have that kind of timing. At least not on purpose. Anyway,
yeah, exactly.
So Steve, he was on a trip to Ireland to go hiking with his wife. They were avid adventurers, and he already, he was well into Clear Creek, having, been run. He was, 8 years into its existence. They go on a vacation. And it turns out the weather was too poorly, and they were staying with a friend in Ireland. Turns out this friend is an avid single malt collector. And so his cabin was full of Scottish single malts. And Steve fell in love with Islay style single malts, right? And they are big, smoky, peaty, oily, robust, epic whiskeys. And so he thought to himself, well, I've got this distillery in Portland, and craft brewing means that there is a million craft breweries in Portland, because it was one of the epicenters of the craft brewing movement, certainly in the early 90s. So he's like, well, okay, so there's breweries, there's malt that grows in Oregon, there's peat in Oregon, because of course there's everything grows here. So he's like, wouldn't it be amazing if I could make an Oregon peated single malt with my cutie little distillery? Unfortunately, the craft malt houses in the area weren't willing to take on the project of actually malting that grain, because once you get that smoke into your system, it's pretty much impossible to get out.
Yeah.
And then every craft beer in Portland would have been smoky and peaty. And so the only option was to get that peated malt from Scotland. The cool thing about McCarthy's is that we break the rules as soon as that malt gets here. And that, one, we for the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society, we're brewing it offsite. We always work with brewery partners, right? And that's, again, goes back to what apparently we started as a tradition for American single malt producers, right. But also born out of necessity, just like peated malt was, because that was the only heat source that they had, and they had to kiln the barley, and that was how they did. And what's now a tradition was based on necessity. The cool thing is that we're a brandy distillery, and that product was developed in a brandy distillery. And so the cuts that we make on the still are eau de vie cuts. They're a proper tight heads cut and a proper tight tails cut. So we're not bleeding into the tails. So we're excluding some of those phenols, but we're also excluding some of the more some of the flavors that for the uninitiated would be too robust to be palatable. Should say, right? Because I do love a smoky peaty, really earthy, old Islay style single malt, but I can also recognize that that's not for everybody, right? So McCarthy's, because not only are we distilling it a single pass on 100% copper hybrid brandy pot stills and taking incredibly tight cuts, what could be an incredibly bombastic amount of flavor in it, it actually ends up being essentially an on-ramp into the category, because it's mellowed by that aging with the Oregon oak. And instead of a fight of flavors, it's actually this beautiful, respectful balance of flavors. And so while there is peat in there and there is smoke in there, it is this kind of beautiful old growth forest loam with like some piney characteristics, some kind of light green notes that come with the peaty characteristic. And the smoke is not like you're in the campfire. It's more like you're walking through the forest at dusk, and you're close enough to the campfire that you can hear your friends laughing, but you're not close enough to figure out what they're actually laughing about, right? And so it's this great way to kind of walk up to that category and to walk up to that flavor within McCarthy's.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Like, obviously, you know what you're talking about, but what, to me, it's so unique. And the fact that you said single pass, that to me is, because I was going to ask you, well, do you use the sweet water to proof down your spirit or anything like that? But I mean, the fact that you're able to get this delicate of a smoke profile on a single pass, obviously doing extremely tight cuts, which that makes the most difference, because a lot of the Islay style distilleries, they go deeper into the tails and do all that. And then, but man, it's giving such a profile that is unlike any other peated whiskey that I've had, because it is fruity, it's floral, it has like almost some apple notes. I hate, coming from the brandy, but it has those, but then the smoke is there, but it's almost like maybe you ate a charred steak, with it. Like, it would complement it so well, because it's not so overbearing that like everybody's gonna be like, whoa, you had peated scotch, I can tell. But it's there enough. So like, if somebody wanted, like you were saying earlier, if somebody wanted to dip their toe into a peated scotch or a peated single malt, this would be the place to go, because it's just enough there. And you're saying it's 100% peated, which that to me is it's counterintuitive of itself. The peat profile is so light and fresh and refreshing, but it's also present at the same time. I don't know how it can be both of those at the same time, other than again, I'll say you guys are magical over there. That's all I'm gonna say.
Well, I'm just pleased that you like it so much.
Well, and the fact that you guys, because I know you guys, and we can talk about this as well, release multiple age statements on this. And so this one being this
3 years.
Go ahead.
That's what we originally launched with, and it wasn't until 2021 that we actually were able to launch an older age format, which is the 6 year that I sent you. So we have 3 and 6. The 3, I can't remember what the 6 retails at, but it's not bad. It's somewhere in the like 70s, I think. The 3 is usually between like $45 and $55 a bottle, I think, depending on which state you are, which retailer you're at. So, and when it comes to, pricing out American single malts, like McCarthy's is not the cheapest American single malt, but the ability to get into, get in amongst a single malt for, between 50 and $55, like that's not super common. It's a very, like, making single malt, like I said, there's built-in inefficiencies because that's where the flavor is. So single malt is inherently more expensive to make, but clearly, since there's 250 and counting single malt producers across the country, everybody's super into it. So it doesn't seem to be slowing anybody down anytime soon.
No. And how do you feel about this new TTB regulation that it's actually a category now? How does that make you feel?
I think it's wonderful, right? Something that as a commission member, we've been working towards for a really long time. So to actually finally see it come through was really amazing. And then, we talked as a group that it wasn't going to be a silver bullet, right? Like I said, there's well over 250 distilleries making single malt. The consumers are already drinking it. So the consumers know it's a thing. The producers absolutely know it's a thing. I think the magic of that is one, elevating us on the global stage of single malt producers, right? So there's 41 countries that are producing single malts around the world. And just over half of them have legal definitions recognized by their country on expectations and consumer transparency for a labeling that is going to say this country's single malt. Right. So it's a growing global category, so as being able to join that category now as one of the ones that has a protected status within its own country is awesome. But lastly, I think for a lot of like box stores, chain stores, liquor stores, it was really going to take the convincing of the legitimacy of a ratified definition to encourage them to actually clear that shelf space for an American single malt section within their store, or an American single malt section on their whiskey list, right? There's a handful. I mean, you see it. There's a handful of amazing liquor stores and restaurants across the country that have long since adopted American single malt as a category and included them in those capacities. But when you're talking about some of the larger opportunities, it was going to take that ratification to really convince them that the category in itself was serious and deserved to be taken seriously. So I think that's probably where we'll see the most change, because the passion on the production side was definitely already there. And so the TTB is not going to change that. And the consumers, just keep encouraging us producers to make more. So I don't think the consumers are going to be too bothered by it either.
No. And so that leads me into this next question. I have a couple more for you, and I don't want to keep you all night as well. But so fighting for shelf space, right? That is another big issue that we have. And the fact that you guys have 1 million brands, how do you fight for that? How do you fight for that shelf space, especially leaning back to the McCarthy's, which like you said, is just now becoming a thing, and people informing the liquor stores, all of them, that it is a thing and it's not just a scotch. Don't put it over by the scotches. It needs to be its own little thing, which if you're going to blend them in, don't call it the scotch aisle, call it single malt aisle or whatever like that, to where you can pick and choose. How have you seen distribution? And if that's not your forte, I understand, but how do you see distribution going with that?
Well, that's kind of like couple questions in one. So I'm gonna start with no, you're good to go. It's a great question. My first answer is more geared towards, we have 1 million products. How do we fight for shelf space when we could be probably fighting within our own portfolio for that shelf space? And the answer really is, when you're going to talk to an account, whether it's a liquor store or a restaurant, one shouldn't go into those places with an adversarial mindset. Like, you're not going in there to take space. You're not going in there to convince them to take them down, Dano, right? Like, we're gonna come in there and then they're gonna leave and they're just gonna be covered in HRD flags everywhere, right? That's not how you should approach any sales. Whether it's, even if you're trying to sell what your whiskey that you make that you love to death to your own mother. Right? That's not how you should approach it. What you should do is, when you're going into any, whether it's a large box store or a small, smaller bottle shop, mom and pop bottle shop, or a restaurant, is spend some time investigating what that business is, what that business does, who their customers are, because their customers are your customers, but maybe those customers don't need what you have. What is the service that you can provide them? Right. And so when you go into that store, it's like, all right, well, this store has like no brandy Like not even like a token cognac or Armagnac on a dusty shelf somewhere. None. But they have an incredible display of all these like hard to find whiskeys. They had to have a deep catalog in international whiskeys. And then also they have all of these wonderful like aperitivos and amaros and stuff like that, right? Awesome. I'm going to look at my portfolio, the things that I make, and I'm going to be like, okay, they're probably going to be interested in the De Graaf Amaro and Aperitivo. I'm obviously going to be pulling out McCarthy's, and I'm going to probably spend more time on the Oloroso and the PX sherry cask finishes of the 6-year than I am on the 6 and the 3, because this place clearly seems to be interested in the more niche, harder to find things, right? The more interesting stuff. And then from there, I might take a gamble on maybe 1 or 2 other products. But when you're going into those kind of situations, you know, every person has a rich and beautifully tapestried inner and outer life. And I don't know about you, but I've got a lot of other details that I'm trying to keep track of just to survive, right?
Absolutely.
If you were to throw 10 things at me, try these 10 things. I'm going to tell you all about them, nuts to bolts. And I'm going to tell you all about me. And I'm going to tell you about my brand story. And I'm going to tell you why we're here. And it has nothing to do with them and what they need. They're not going to remember anything you had to say. Go in there with 2, 4, maybe 5 products and spend the time to get to know them, spend the time to get to know their company and where your products fit into what they're trying to do, the list and that they're trying to curate, the flavors that they're trying to lead their customers to, because they're trying to serve their customers, which are your customers. So that's how you take something as big as 300 SKUs across 30 brands, and you spend time with this restaurant and you spend time with this liquor store, and then you go across town and have a drink at this cocktail bar. And have successful interactions every time, because it's not about pushing the whole portfolio. It's about getting to know the people and the people behind the business and learning what you can do for them as a producer of products that you find value in.
And that is one of the reasons, again, why I started this podcast as well, is to showcase people like yourself who are doing amazing things in the liquor making industry. I'm not even going to say whiskey, the liquor making industry, and showcasing you and your brand and putting a light towards it, because if people see it, they will come, right? They will come to the distillery. They will do the things. If you build it, they will come. All right. So one more question, and hopefully you can go back into your Rolodex on this one. My good buddy, Doug, he did a single barrel pick with you, single malt Frontiers. And I have a bottle of that. It's in the house. I'm not going to go get it. I'm not pausing to go get it. But tell us a little bit about that journey, because that one was a little bit interesting, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The fact that McCarthy's it wasn't finished in an ex rum cask. It was aged in an ex rum cask. That was primary maturation in a Casa Magdalena rum cask. A beautiful rum, if you have a chance to pick up a bottle of it, by the way. Absolutely stunning. It's a great balance because of the molasses that they're using, the type of molasses. They're using molasses that hasn't had the sugar crystals spun out of it yet. So you get a little bit of some of those like greener notes that you would expect from like a rum agricole. But then you also get some of those like beautifully like brown sugar molassesy notes as well, which are some of my favorite rums. But it's still really crisp and clean, and it's got some lemongrass, and I don't know, it's great. 10 out of 10. No notes for Casa Magdalena. But then it was a barrel trade, and you know, I don't know if I irritate the whiskey community at large, but so many of the things that we do. I mean, Steve was in his 40s and he wasn't sure what he was going to do with himself after he sold his previous company. And he was like, well, I love pear brandy and my relatives in Hood River grow pears. It can't be that hard to start a distillery and make it myself. Why am I trying to figure out how to import it into the United States from Europe? And then started the 3rd craft distillery in the country, right? He fell in love with Isla style whiskey and was like, I can probably, I don't know, I'll make that in my distillery. So why did we decide to do primary maturation of McCarthy's into rum casks? Well, we traded westward for 2 apple brandy casks. because they had a couple of they work with Casa Magdalena, and they had some empties, and they called us up and they were like, hey, tradesies? And we were like, yeah, 100%. Absolutely. Let's do that. I did the trade. I drove my CRV. You can fit 3 bourbon barrels in a CRV, by the way, if you put the seats down. You're welcome. Yeah, I drove them across town. We put 2 50-gallon size, 200-liter apple brandy barrels in my car, drove across the river to Westward, and rolled them out. And they threw 2 Casa Magdalena 50-gallon rum casks in my barrel, and I high-fived them. Went on my merry way. What were we going to put in them? McCarthy's. Are we going to put something that's going to go into a blend that we're just about to bottle? Hell no. Put some new stuff in there, right? That stuff is that we need to count on those bottle sales for the stuff that's already in maturation for our flagship whiskey. There's no way we were going to pull stocks out of, and so that's how it happened. There wasn't. I would love to tell you that at some point in time, and there have been a few times where products have been developed because hopes and dreams and fairy tales and things that we'd like to see, and then we kind of craft and move things in that direction. But in so many ways, it's the answer is because we can, and because we could, and we had the option to. So did we think? We only had the 2. It was worth a gamble on two barrels of whiskey, and we've sold them both, and it's a really great testament to how. It was the same liquid from the same batch with the same, brought to barrel proof with the same water in 2 sister rum barrels. And they lived in the same rack next to each other in the barrel room. And yet very, very different. The 2 different rum cask releases. And the one, it's great to mention to your listeners, we still have a few cases left. So if you go online and search for the McCarthy's rum barrel aged, I think it's, rum barrel aged McCarthy's, I think should bring you to the website. Still available for sale. Get it while you can. There's only, I think, 3 or 4 cases left. So if you're interested, but yeah, there is, there may or may not be a dozen barrels of experiments that have started along those lines where it's like, we'll do a couple barrels, see how it works. Yeah. If it's weird, I guess we have a couple barrels of something weird. If it's cool, it's going to be really cool.
Yeah. And that's what's really cool about the whiskey enthusiasts, right? Because now we're talking about whiskey, is they don't care that it's weird, right? They're like, that's weird. I like that. It might not be their everyday drinker, or whatever you want to call it. This is like a experience pour. You need to try this. This is weird. Try it, which I do to people all the time. I find weird stuff and I'm like, here, try this. And they're like, why do you want me to try that? It's so weird. Because it's weird. You need to try it. And that's,
I will say as just for my own heart, and also I'm gonna introduce a wonderful friend of mine. Not weird, fun.
Oh, fun.
Right?
Fun. Got
it's not weird, it's fun. Because if you haven't heard of Tough Talk Distilling in Portland, Andy Garrison makes nothing but fun things. He actually made a rye whiskey that he steeped in rye bread, if memory serves. He has full permission to come and step on my foot if I got that wrong.
I love that.
It's great. And he released a banana brandy. It's made from 100% fermented brandies or fermented bananas. And I was in Portland, and my tattoo artist canceled my session once I got into town, and I'd taken the whole day off. And so I was like, well, now I'm in town and I don't have a plan. What am I going to do? And I was like, well, I know Andy's over at the distillery peeling bananas. I'm going to go over there and peel some bananas while I figure out what I'm going to do with my day. So I spent like an hour peeling bananas because Andy is amazing. So yeah, if you haven't spent some time he's Tough Talk Distilling on Instagram.
Awesome.
The releases are small, but you want to talk about some really fun things to celebrate in the spirits world. Like Andy Garrison is amazing.
So speaking of tattoos, right? So I my tattoo guy, RIP, he passed away recently, but he, I went to go do a session with him, and he's in Austin. So I drove up to Austin, waiting for him, waiting in the truck, just waiting there. Cause it's his shop. So I'm just waiting there. It's like 30 minutes past our thing. And he's a stoner. So I'm like, it's fine. It's whatever.
Sure.
So I text him and I'm like, hey bud, I'm here. No response. And I'm like, what the heck? So I call him and he answers and he goes, hey, what's up? And I'm all, I'm just here for our appointment. He goes, bro, I'm in Dallas at a tattoo convention. So, what? I totally forgot. I'm like, oh my
no.
God. Like it was supposed to be like an 8-hour session as well.
Oh,
And
man.
I'm like, you ruined my life, but saved me like $600-700. So that's fine.
Yeah.
We'll make it work. But yeah, no, that was a side quest
No.
there. But
Yes. Yep.
no,
Yep. Been
I'm
there.
like, oh my God, it's so difficult to nail down a tattoo artist, which I don't do that anymore because I got my fill. I have room left. I just, got my fill of it. It hurts too bad. It freaking hurts. I turned into a weenie. Well, my tattoo artist, he was very heavy-handed. He was old school. He had the old school gun, and he just drilled you, and you were just like, oh my God, I hate you. After 6 or 8 hours, you're literally bleeding all over the place. And he's like, you're good to go. He put a paper towel on it, and I walked out the room.
It took 2 hours to do. I'm good for a bit. I don't know if I could do it in whole hours. 2 hours is plenty. I've had plenty of other injuries. I don't need to prove anything on my pain tolerance. I've gone through a lot being a farm kid.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But
Absolutely.
for the art that I have, absolutely worth it. And I'm sure it'll be worth it again someday soon. But yeah, 8 hours. Good Lord.
Yeah. No, it was a pain in the butt. But anyway, we're not talking about tattoos. We're talking about whiskey. But that's what I love about talking to you and people like you is the fact that we can go off tangent, come back and take it over again. So McCarthy's as a brand, and I'm gonna cut it off here in a second because I gotta go inside. My wife's fixing to come home and she's gonna yell at me for being in the shed for too long. So just letting you know that. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. Yeah, you're gonna get me in trouble. So why did we we pick 100 proof on this whiskey and not say 46 or 112? I mean, is there a specific reason? Is that where it was at its best, or is it just a good round number to where you can add ice or water or whatever you want?
Where it was at its best. We do, a big thing. And I find myself saying it a lot, so I'm going to go ahead and say it's a theme when we're talking about the way we handle whiskeys is like we listen to the whiskey, right? So when it comes to the finishes on the trail's end, there isn't a standard SOP for how long it's on the staves or how long it's in the barrel or how long it's in the apple barrel. The whiskey is ready when the whiskey is ready. And sometimes that really infuriates the sales team. And it's a blessing that my boss, Brian Petros, the VP of production, he toes that line. Like we do not bottle something unless it is ready. And he's got my back, which is amazing. Because I understand the pressure he must be under from the sales team. And it's like, we got to get things in the bottle. We've got orders waiting. We do not put anything in the bottle unless it's ready. And the whiskey will tell you when it's ready. So, with proof of that we release things, the sherry cask finishes are a cask strength. Those are in the neighborhood of 112 plus or minus. The 6 years at 100, the Trails End 10 and apple brandy finish, those are both at 105. And it's because we went through and we did, 5 or 10 proof increments of these, bringing them all the way down. We did a blind tasting. So we often, because we're a small crew, we'll do a double blind to make sure that nobody knows what is in each glass. And you go through and taste it and you vote on which one is your favorite. And that's how we find what proof we're going to hit. It's
That's
just
awesome.
About listening to the whiskey.
Yeah, exactly. And because, I mean, I put myself in this category. So just work with me here. But the whiskey wants to make itself, really. I mean, we're just there to make it happen. Obviously it doesn't have little arms and legs. It can't go and do and make the thing. So we have to be the facilitator for that. And yeah, I mean, it is so interesting that because there's some people that want the highest proof whiskey that you can get, blah, 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 this hazmat type whiskeys and things like that, which I've tried some that are okay and some that are pretty good and some that are absolutely horrible. So, I mean, it just depends. There is a thing back in the day, and we're talking pre-prohibition and right around prohibition, they went into the barrel at 100 proof. And so it's like, there's a reason they did that because that was the best flavor that they got out of it. And also, their yield was pretty good. So, I mean, I don't know.
It's a great barrel proof, because then you have access to the ethanol soluble as well as the water soluble ingredients that are in the wood grain.
Yeah. Oh man, this has been so much fun. I can't thank you enough for coming on here and hanging out with me.
Of course. I'm sorry it took me so long to get around to it.
No. Don't, I feel like since we've got this started, there could possibly be a round 2. We can go a little deeper into some of these brands. But
we've got 300 things to try.
Exactly. No, one of the things I wanted to say, you said you were a fan of Islay Scotches. What is one of the brands that you go to that's not you guys' million brands? What is one of the brands you go to, like when you just want to drink, you've had a long day drinking whiskey all day or whatever you do, nobody knows what you do all day, but you just want to have a drink after work or on the weekend or whatever. What is one of the ones that you go to? That's just what I kind of like to ask people, just so I can kind of get a basis of how everybody's feeling out there.
I don't know. I don't have a go-to, I think, at this point in time, right? I'm steadily working on my American single malt collection at home, right? So there's a lot of really great friends that I have at home. And I don't want to name them because they're all my friends. And so if I forget somebody, it's like trying to name the 7 dwarves, right?
Yes,
you're always going to forget one of them. But I'm very fortunate to have more than 7. But yeah, no, I love American single malts. They're great. I have in my collection things, from the Northeast. I have things from Louisiana, from the Southeast, from Central Mass, Center Mass, the whole gambit. And I love them all for different reasons. I mostly, whenever I'm out at restaurants, I'm just trying to try things new, because there's always something new to try. Right. And I don't want to always call for the same thing and miss out on an opportunity to try something new. So I think the last new one that I tried, I had an Oban like 12, I want to say. And it was fantastic. Absolutely phenomenal. So like, would I order it again? Absolutely. But to be honest, if there was something else on the menu, I'd probably try something new. Right.
Yeah. And it's all about the exploration, right? Because as a distiller, you want to further your palate. So trying other people's whiskey just gives you that kind of like, okay, how did they do that? And you kind of like pick it apart, even though I know when you're out eating dinner or whatever, you're not trying to work, right? But at the same time, you're like critiquing it a little more than you probably should. I'm sure you do that.
I'm thoughtfully enjoying it, I think, is a much better way. I'm definitely not being like, oh, they did this wrong, right? Because who's to say it's wrong? Like, my palate's not the best palate in the world, right? And anybody thinks that they have the magic palate is foolish. And that's why there's a handful of people that want to see like so the BJCP is the beer judges guide. It's the style guide that you can pass and be a certified beer judge, right? I don't ever want to see something like the BJCP style guide for whiskeys or spirits, because like let's talk about something completely tangential. Mezcals, right? Like, mezcals completely are all over the map in the flavors. Like, what kind of, like, this one's was close to a dairy farm, and so the natural ferment actually has a lot of lacto notes in it, right? Like, and that is not a fault. Like, a mezcal that is excessively cheesy, it is not a fault. It's not something that I prefer,
right?
But that's not to say that it's not beautiful and award winning. Right. And so that's, I'm not going to try something new and try to tear it apart and critique it and be like, well, if I was me, I would do better, because no, that's their best bottle of whiskey. I'm going to enjoy it the way that they wanted me to enjoy it, and celebrate it the way that they want it to be celebrated. Am I going to buy a bottle? I might not, but am I going to spend the time to appreciate the hard work that went into it? Absolutely.
Yep. Enough said. Yeah, that's exactly the answer I was expecting from you. But, yeah, exactly. You're so predictable at this point. Who would have thought? no. This has been so much fun. I can't wait to do it again real soon. So why don't, before we leave, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you guys' products and any Instagram, Facebook, whatever. Not that anybody's on Facebook. You got a MySpace? No. Lord.
No, I'm not Friendster.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, one, Randall, thank you so very much to have me on. This has been an absolute pleasure. Two, if we do this again, I'm going to insist that I bring on the distillers because it would be great to hear their opinions on all of your questions as well. And Garrett and Everett are amazing young men, right? Yes. And lastly, as far as where to find us, so my Instagram handle is @thebartlemate. And which you'll have my last name in the show notes, I'm sure. Yes. And then I'm also running the Instagram accounts for McCarthy's, Clear Creek, and Trails End. So I believe McCarthy's on Instagram is McCarthy's Whiskey, Clear Creek Distillery, Trails End. Those are the handles for there. We also have a website, hrdspirits.com, and we do have some direct-to-consumer shipping for some of our products through our website. So that's a great place to look. And then we also have a pretty good where to find us part of that website so if you're looking for a specific product in an area near you can go ahead and use that. And then if that doesn't work, you're always welcome to send a DM to those brand accounts because I'm the one that answers it. And then I get to pester the sales team asking, hey, like if I have somebody that's in the peninsula in Minnesota, where could I send them closest to find a bottle of pear brandy? And they, I'm sure, super love it when I send them those questions at like 7 o'clock at night on a Saturday. But I'm absolutely happy to find the nearest bottle to you. I want to make sure that if your creativity has been sparked, you've heard something that you absolutely want to try, please get in touch with us. We want to be able to get that bottle in your hands.
Absolutely. I'm not going to put in the show notes every brand you guys have because that would take me all day, and I have a limited number of letters I could use. No, but
we're pretty widely available. I think we have distribution in 4 states and 7 countries. So, or it's 41 states and 7 countries. So that makes it a lot easier. We're pretty well spread out across the country, so it shouldn't be too hard to find a bottle near you.
Awesome. So, thank y'all very much for hanging out with us, and y'all be good. And until next time, keep your spirits up. Peace out.